I think I didn't do anything wrong, just made a mistake everyone keeps judging me for. But when the courier handed me that thick envelope with my husband's name on it, and I saw the words, petition for divorce and custody, that's when I realized he wasn't bluffing this time. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm not saying I did anything wrong, just that maybe I made one bad choice at the wrong time. Everyone keeps acting like I'm this horrible person, but they don't know the full story. They didn't see how lonely it got in that house, how quiet things were when Evan was gone for days, coming home too tired to even look at me. So yeah, I made a mistake. I slept with his younger brother while he was at work. It sounds terrible when you say it like that, I know. But it wasn't planned, and it wasn't what people think. It just happened. One small moment that somehow turned into everything falling apart. And now I'm the one sitting here alone, staring at the envelope on the table. The one that says, petition for divorce and custody. Evan didn't shout or throw things or even ask why. He just hired a lawyer, gathered his proof, and walked away like I was a stranger. Everyone says he's being calm and reasonable. I say he's being cruel, because at least if he screamed, I'd know he still cared. But silence, that's worse. It's like I don't exist anymore. The envelope had been sitting on the kitchen table for almost an hour before I touched it. Thick, official-looking, with my name and Evan's printed neatly across the front. I kept staring at it, half expecting it to vanish if I ignored it long enough. Divorce and custody. Those were the words written under the seal. My hand shook when I finally picked it up. I didn't even have to open it to know what was inside. Evan had warned me weeks ago in that quiet, steady voice of his that he was done. I thought he was bluffing. He's always been calm, always patient, the type to cool off, not to act. But this time, he followed through. It's strange how quickly your home stops feeling like your home once someone decides to leave you. The house felt hollow. His mug was still on the counter, his jacket still hanging by the door, but it all looked staged, like a museum of a life that didn't belong to me anymore. I told myself I'd open the envelope after dinner, then after cleaning, then after a shower. Anything to delay what was coming. I called my sister Lydia, because she always sides with me. She answered on the second ring. He actually did it, I said, trying to sound more annoyed than scared. What do you mean? Did he move out? Worse, I said. He sent papers. There was a pause, then her voice softened. Ilyra, maybe he's just angry. You know how men get when they feel embarrassed? I almost laughed. Embarrassed? He should be embarrassed, acting like I'm some criminal because I made one mistake. Everyone cheats, Lydia. It's not the end of the world. She sighed, the kind of sigh that told me she was about to say something I didn't want to hear. Everyone doesn't cheat, Ilyra. And not with their husband's brother. That's not fair, I snapped. You don't understand. Nate was there when Evan wasn't. He actually talked to me. Lydia stayed quiet for a few seconds, then changed the subject, like she always does when I start defending myself. What are you going to do? I'll handle it, I said. I'll call him tomorrow. This whole thing has gone too far. But even as I said it, I knew Evan wouldn't pick up. When we first met, he used to call me during lunch breaks, just to hear my voice. Now, I'd be lucky to get a single-word reply to a text. Somewhere between his endless work hours and my constant need for more attention, something cracked. I used to tell people he was the quiet one, the steady one, the rock. But I think I confused steady with distant. When the front door creaked open that evening, my heart jumped. For a split second, I thought maybe he'd changed his mind. But it was Marjorie, his mother. She still had a key from when she used to help with Clara after school. I saw his car at my place, she said without greeting. He told me to stop by, make sure you got the papers. Her tone was careful, neutral. It made me angry. So he's sending you to babysit me now? I'm not here to take sides, she said. I just think this is all sad. For everyone. I didn't answer. Marjorie placed a small grocery bag on the counter. I brought you some soup. You probably haven't eaten. I wanted to tell her to take it back, that I didn't need her pity, but the smell of chicken broth filled the air, and something in me just deflated. You think I'm a monster too, don't you? I said quietly. She hesitated. I think you made a terrible choice, but I also think my son loved you very much, and that's what makes this so painful. Her voice cracked slightly, and that hurt more than any insult could have. I wanted to say something, anything, to defend myself, but all that came out was, he wasn't perfect either. No one said he was, she said gently, but he didn't deserve this. She left not long after, leaving the soup on the stove. I didn't eat it. I just sat there staring at the envelope until the words blurred. By morning, I'd convinced myself that I could fix things. I would go to Evan's site, talk to him face to face. He always listened when I spoke calmly. Maybe if I explained how lonely I'd been, he'd understand. Maybe he'd remember that before everything went wrong. We were a family. I drove out to the construction site where he worked, parked just far enough away that I could see him without being seen. He looked the same as always, steady, focused, not a hint of emotion on his face. When I finally got out of the car, he noticed me immediately but didn't come over. He just nodded, like I was some stranger stopping by for directions. I just want to talk, I called out. He looked at the men working around him and then said, This isn't the place, Ilyra. It never is, I muttered. But he heard me. His eyes softened for just a second, and I thought maybe he'd walk over. Instead, he turned back to his work. I drove home shaking, half with anger, half with panic. He wasn't even angry. Anger I could handle. Indifference scared me. Lydia called again that evening. Did you talk to him? Sort of, I said. He's acting like I'm invisible. Maybe give him space, she suggested. Let the lawyers sort it out for now. The lawyers, I repeated bitterly. He actually hired one. What did you expect? You slept with his brother. He wasn't supposed to find out, I shouted before realizing how that sounded. I mean, it wasn't serious. Nate doesn't even mean anything to me. There was a long silence on the other end. Then why risk everything for him? She asked. I didn't have an answer. I just hung up. That night, I finally opened the envelope. The first page was just formalities, names, dates. But as I read further, my stomach dropped. He wasn't just filing for divorce. He was filing for primary custody of Clara. He'd listed moral and emotional instability as his reason. The words felt like a slap. I could almost hear his calm voice explaining it to his lawyer. She's not a bad mother. She's just not steady. I sat there in the quiet kitchen, staring at the papers, the ink smudging where my tears hit. I wanted to call him, to scream that he couldn't take my daughter, that whatever I'd done had nothing to do with her. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. He was protecting Clara from me. The clock ticked past midnight before I realized I'd been sitting there for hours. Every sound in the house felt too loud. The fridge humming, the clock ticking, my own breath. I tried to imagine what Evan was doing. Probably asleep, probably fine, probably relieved. When the phone buzzed, my heart leapt, but it was just a message from Marjorie. Please don't call Nate anymore. It's making things worse. I threw the phone across the couch. How dare she lecture me like I was some child? I wasn't the only one who made mistakes. Nate was the one who showed up, who leaned in, who didn't stop when he should have. But of course, everyone was painting me as the villain. Still, the words custody and unfit circled in my head until dawn. For the first time, I started to wonder if maybe this was what losing really felt like. Not shouting, not fighting, just silence. By morning, the envelope was still on the table, but now it looked heavier somehow, like it carried the weight of everything I'd broken. I poured myself coffee, black and bitter, and whispered into the empty room. He'll calm down. He always does. But a small voice inside me, the one I always ignored, whispered back, "Not this time." Before everything fell apart, before that envelope, I used to think of our house as proof that we'd made it. Not fancy, but ours. 2 bedrooms, soft light through the kitchen window in the mornings, Clara's drawings taped on the fridge. It looked like a normal life from the outside. Maybe that's why I convinced myself it was fine, even when I started feeling like a guest in my own marriage. Evan worked long hours at the construction company. He left before sunrise, came home covered in dust and too tired to talk. I told people I admired how hard he worked for us, but the truth was, I resented it. Dinner with him was like eating beside a shadow. He'd ask how my day was, and before I could even finish answering, he'd start checking something on his phone. Estimates, invoices, messages from his boss. It made me feel small, like background noise. At the clinic, I was different. People smiled when I walked in. My coworkers said I brightened the room. I liked that. I liked feeling seen. Sometimes the doctors would compliment my organization skills or my appearance, and I'd smile just a bit too long. Maybe that's where it started. The hunger for someone to notice me again. Evan didn't notice much anymore. When I dyed my hair lighter, he said, "Looks nice," without looking up from his plate. When I bought a new dress, he didn't even comment. I told myself he was tired, but deep down, it stung. Every little silence started adding up until it felt like I was invisible in my own home. The first person I told about how unhappy I was wasn't Evan. It was Lydia. We were sitting in my car outside her apartment, and I said, "I just don't feel like he cares anymore." She gave me that worried sister look. "You think maybe you two just need time together? A weekend away?" I laughed. "You think I can get him to take a weekend off? He doesn't even take days off when he's sick." "Well, maybe he's just trying to be responsible," she said. "You always said you liked that about him." I liked it when it didn't feel like I was married to a ghost. Lydia didn't know what to say to that. Nobody ever does when the woman complaining has a husband who doesn't hit her, doesn't yell, doesn't cheat. You can't make people understand how cold neglect can feel until you're living in it. Around that time, Evan's younger brother Nate came back to town. He'd been gone for years, playing music somewhere out west, according to Marjorie. When I first met him, back when Evan and I were dating, he was the fun one. Loud, charming, reckless. The kind of person you roll your eyes at but secretly envy. The day he showed up again, I was in the backyard hanging laundry. Evan had mentioned casually that Nate might visit but hadn't said when. I looked up and there he was, leaning against the fence, grinning. "You still hang clothes out like an old lady," he teased. I laughed because no one else talked to me like that anymore. Evan's words were always functional. "Where's my blue shirt? Did you pay the bill? I'll be home late." But Nate, he had this way of talking that made even nothing sound interesting. That first afternoon, he stayed for coffee. I texted Evan that his brother had dropped by. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. That was it. I should have stopped there, but it felt good having company that looked me in the eye when I spoke. Nate asked questions, actually listened, laughed at my jokes. He even said, "Evan's lucky. You could have done way better." I told him not to say things like that, but I didn't mean it. After that, he started coming around more often. Sometimes he'd show up with takeout, saying Evan had mentioned he'd be working late. Other times he'd drop off something small for Clara. A sketchbook, a silly toy. I told myself it was harmless. Family helping family. But there was this moment, small, stupid, that sticks in my mind. It was a Friday night. Evan had promised to come home early for once, so I cooked. Real dinner, not takeout. I set the table, even lit a candle. He texted me at 7. "Sorry, running late. Don't wait up." That was it. No apology, no promise to make it up to me. I sat there staring at the food until it went cold. Then Nate texted, "You up?" And before I even thought, I replied, "Yeah, Come over. We didn't do anything that night. He just came by with a bottle of cheap wine, sat across from me, and made me laugh until my stomach hurt. He told stories about his failed gigs and broken-down cars, and I told him about the clinic, about how dull everything felt. I remember saying, "Sometimes I feel like I disappeared and no one noticed." He didn't say anything at first. Then he looked at me and said, "I noticed." That's when the line started to blur. After that night, I started checking my phone more than usual, waiting for his messages. He'd send little things, a song lyric, a joke, a photo of his guitar, and I'd smile like a teenager. Evan didn't notice, or maybe he did and just didn't care. I started dressing better for no reason. Makeup, perfume, new tops. I told myself I was just trying to feel good again. A few weeks later, Lydia came by and noticed Nate's truck in the driveway. "You two are getting close, huh?" she said, half joking. "He's just company," I said quickly. "Evan doesn't mind." "You sure about that?" she asked. "Of course, he's his brother." But even saying it out loud made something twist in my stomach. One evening, Evan actually got home before sunset. He looked surprised to see Nate sitting on the couch, playing with Clara. The air felt heavy. Nate grinned like nothing was wrong, said, "Hey man, just keeping your girls company." Evan didn't say much, just nodded and went to shower. When Nate left, I followed Evan into the kitchen, ready for a fight, but he just said, "He shouldn't be here this much, Ilyra." "He's your brother," I said. "Are you jealous or something?" He sighed. "I'm tired. I don't want to argue." That's how it always went. He'd avoid the fight, I'd win by default, and we'd go to bed angry, in silence. At the clinic, one of my co-workers asked if everything was okay at home. I must have looked distracted. "Just married life," I said. She smiled knowingly, like she understood. I wanted to believe someone did. The next weekend, Marjorie invited us all to dinner. Evan worked late again, but Nate went. He sat next to me, cracking jokes, making everyone laugh. Marjorie told stories from when they were kids, how Nate always got into trouble and Evan always fixed it. "You're lucky to have both of them," she told me with a warm smile. I nodded, but guilt prickled under my skin. When Evan finally arrived, tired and dirty from work, the laughter died. He hugged his mother, said hello, then sat quietly through dinner. I tried to draw him into conversation, but he just smiled politely. Afterward, Nate offered to help me with the dishes. When he reached over to grab a plate, his hand brushed mine. Just that small touch sent a spark through me. I told myself it didn't mean anything, but later, lying in bed next to Evan, I couldn't stop replaying it in my mind. His hand, his grin, the way he actually looked at me. Evan was turned away, already asleep, breathing slow and steady. And I remember thinking, this can't be all there is. Maybe that's when I decided it wasn't really wrong. Maybe that's when I started rewriting the story in my head. Lonely wife, distant husband, harmless brother-in-law. A perfect lie wrapped in self-pity. Looking back now, I can see the pattern. Every time Evan pulled away, I found a reason to blame him. Every time I crossed a line, I called it an accident. I told myself he'd stopped seeing me long before I ever saw Nate. But the truth is, Evan saw everything. He just didn't say it yet. He was waiting, watching, letting me dig my own grave. And I kept smiling, thinking I was getting away with it. It happened on a Thursday. I still remember because it was one of those slow grey mornings when everything feels heavier than it should. Evan had left before dawn for another long shift, and Clara was at school. I was at the clinic pretending to organize patient files when Nate texted, "You sound tired lately. Want to get out tonight?" I hesitated, staring at the message. I knew what people would think if they saw it, but I also knew how empty the house would feel that night. Evan had said he'd be late again. I told myself it was just a drink, just conversation. "I deserve a little fun," I whispered to no one. That night we met at a bar near the river, the kind of place Evan never liked. Too loud, too bright, too full of strangers. Nate was already there, wearing that crooked smile that always made him look like he was in on a secret. He ordered me a drink before I even sat down. "To surviving the week," he said, raising his glass. I laughed, and it felt easy, natural. I told him about my job, how I handled all the clinic paperwork while the doctors barely noticed my name. He told me about the music gigs that never worked out, the women who left when the money ran out. We traded stories like they were truths, though most of them probably weren't. At one point, he leaned closer and said, "You know, Evan doesn't talk about you much." That stung. "What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged. "Just saying. He talks about work, bills, weather. But when I ask about you, it's like he doesn't want to. Maybe he doesn't see you anymore." I rolled my eyes, but my chest tightened. He's just private. Or maybe he doesn't realize what he has. Nate smiled softly. "You still make people stare when you walk in a room." I wanted to say, "Don't," but I didn't. No one had said something like that to me in years. When I got home, I could still hear his words echoing. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, studying myself like I was someone new. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. That was the first small crack. The next few weeks blurred. We texted more, at first harmless, then not so much. Compliments turned to jokes. Jokes turned to confessions. I'd tell him how Evan barely spoke to me anymore, how he came home and went straight to the couch. Nate would reply with things like, "He's lucky I'm not him," or, "If I had someone like you, I'd never leave her waiting." I told myself it was only words, but words are dangerous when they fill the silence left by someone else. Then came the night everything crossed the line. Evan had a late project deadline. He texted me around 9. "Don't wait up. Might stay at the site to finish." I read it twice, then threw the phone on the couch. I didn't reply. A few minutes later, Nate texted, "You sound quiet tonight. Need company?" I should have said no. I didn't. He showed up at my door 20 minutes later with a six-pack and that easy grin. Figured you shouldn't drink alone. We sat on the couch watching a movie neither of us cared about. The air felt heavy, full of things we weren't saying. When he laughed at something stupid on screen, I looked at him instead of the TV. His eyes met mine, and before I could think, before I could stop myself, I leaned in. It was brief, a kiss that started soft and ended with the sound of my heart pounding in my ears. I pulled away first, breathless. "This is wrong," I whispered. He smiled. "Then why does it feel right?" I wanted to slap him, to tell him to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there, frozen, while guilt and thrill fought inside me. When he finally left, I locked the door and sank onto the floor. I told myself it wouldn't happen again, that it was just a moment of weakness, a slip. I would wake up tomorrow, pretend nothing happened, and move on. But pretending gets easier the second time. The next week, I found excuses to see him again, dropping off something for Marjorie, meeting for coffee to talk about Evan. Each time I told myself it was harmless, but each time I crossed another line. And each time I came home to Evan sitting at the table, quiet, polite, asking if I'd eaten. I started resenting him even more for not asking questions, for not noticing the change in me. I told myself his silence was proof he didn't care, when really it was the opposite. He knew. It was Lydia who first called me out. She came by one afternoon unannounced and saw Nate's truck in the driveway. "Does Evan know he's here?" she asked, her eyes sharp. I tried to laugh it off. "We're just talking. You're reading too much into things." "Ilyra," she said softly, "this isn't talking. This is dangerous." I crossed my arms. "You're judging me now? I'm worried about you, about Clara. What happens if Evan finds out?" I snapped then. "He won't, and even if he does, maybe he'll finally realize what it feels like to be ignored." Lydia shook her head. "You're playing with fire." "Then maybe I want to get burned," I said, just to hurt her. She left without another word. After that, I started lying to everyone, to Lydia, to Marjorie, to myself. The more I lied, the easier it got. Then one evening, Evan came home early. I didn't hear the car at first. Nate and I were in the living room, drinking coffee, music playing quietly. The moment the front door opened, my stomach dropped. Evan stepped inside, dusty from work, eyes tired. He froze when he saw Nate's jacket hanging over the chair. His gaze moved slowly from the jacket to me, to the 2 cups on the table. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no words came. He didn't shout, he didn't accuse. He just looked at me for a long time, then said, "Tell Clara I'll be late tomorrow," and walked upstairs. Nate left right after, mumbling something about not wanting trouble. The silence he left behind was deafening. I followed Evan up the stairs, my heart racing. "Evan, wait," I said, standing in the doorway of our bedroom. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. "It's not what it looks like," I said quickly. He looked up at me, calm, unreadable. "Then what is it?" "We were just talking," I lied. "About what?" I paused too long. "Family," I said finally. "You, mostly." He stood up slowly, his voice quiet but steady. "You think I don't know when someone's lying to me?" I felt my throat tighten. "You're overreacting." He shook his head. "No, I'm not. I just finally understand." I tried to grab his hand, but he stepped back. "You've been gone for a long time, Ilyra," he said. "I just didn't want to see it." Then he walked out. I stood there in the dark, trembling. For once, I had nothing to say. No excuse, no spin, no story to make me look better. Just the sound of the front door closing and the echo of my own choices. The next morning, he was gone before I woke up. His coffee cup in the sink, his pillow cold. Clara asked where Daddy went, and I said he had an early meeting. But even she looked at me like she didn't believe it. By the weekend, Nate stopped answering my texts. Lydia stopped visiting. Marjorie's calls became shorter, polite but distant. I told myself it wasn't over yet, that I could fix it, that Evan would calm down like he always did. But somewhere deep inside, I knew something had shifted. The look on his face that night wasn't anger. It was finality. And that scared me more than any fight ever could. The weeks after that night felt like walking through fog. Heavy, dull, endless. Evan didn't yell or demand explanations. He didn't accuse me or ask for details. He just stopped. Stopped talking. Stopped reaching for me. Stopped trying. At first, I thought it was guilt, that he needed time to process what he thought he saw. But soon I realized he wasn't waiting for anything. He'd already decided. He still came home every night, but he moved through the house like a guest. He ate quietly, helped Clara with her homework, watched the news in silence, then went to bed early. When I tried to start a conversation, he'd answer in short, polite sentences that made me feel like a stranger. Once, I said, "You're not even trying to fix this." He looked up from his plate. "There's nothing to fix." That was it. No shouting, no argument, just quiet acceptance, like I'd become another chore he'd finally decided to stop doing. I started to panic. I wasn't used to being ignored. I could handle anger, even resentment, but not this blank, steady calm. It made me feel powerless. I needed him to react, to care, to show me something. So I started talking, to everyone. When people asked how things were at home, I didn't hold back. I told my co-workers that Evan had become cold, distant, maybe even controlling. I told Lydia that he made me feel like a prisoner in my own house. I told Marjorie, when she stopped by, that her son was pushing me to the edge. The thing is, people believe confidence. I spoke like I was the victim, and soon enough, that's how they saw me. At the clinic, my friend Paula said, "Men like that always shut down instead of talking. You deserve better." And I nodded, soaking in her sympathy like medicine. It didn't matter that I was lying. It mattered that someone still thought I was right. Evan never confronted me about the rumors, but I know he heard them. Small-town gossip travels faster than air. He just carried on, quiet as ever, but I could see it in the set of his jaw, in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes anymore. Then came the dinner at Marjorie's. She called one morning and said she wanted to get the family together. Her tone was too sweet, too careful, and I should have known something was off. But I said yes anyway. I told myself it would be a chance to fix things, to show everyone that we were fine, that I was fine. That Saturday, I put on my best dress and spent an hour on my hair. When Evan came downstairs, already dressed in a plain grey shirt, I said, "You could at least pretend you care about how you look." He didn't rise to it. "Let's go. Clara's waiting in the car." The drive was silent except for the sound of Clara humming in the back seat. I kept glancing at Evan, hoping he'd say something, anything, but his eyes stayed on the road. Marjorie's house smelled like roast chicken and lemon polish. She hugged us at the door, her arms tight around Clara, lighter around me. "It's good to see you both," she said. Her voice was kind but cool. Nate was there too, which made my stomach twist. He barely looked at me. I caught him whispering something to Marjorie when he thought I wasn't watching. Evan noticed, but he didn't react. He just poured himself a drink and sat at the far end of the table. Dinner started awkwardly. Marjorie kept up polite conversation, asking about Clara's school projects, about my work, about Evan's latest site. No one mentioned the tension hanging in the air, but it was there, thick, buzzing, waiting to burst. At some point, I decided to take control of the story again. I smiled, too brightly, and said, "You know, things have been difficult lately. Evan's been under so much pressure, it's been hard for both of us." Marjorie's fork paused mid-air. "Pressure?" she repeated softly. "Yes," I said. "He's been so distant, and I've been trying to be supportive, but there's only so much one person can do, right?" I forced a small laugh. "I think he's taking things out on me sometimes." The room went silent. Even Clara stopped fidgeting with her napkin. Evan looked at me then, really looked at me. Not angry, just tired. "Don't do this, Ilyra," he said quietly. I ignored him. "I'm just saying," I continued, "people don't see what goes on behind closed doors." Marjorie set her fork down carefully. "My son has never raised his voice at you." I shrugged. "There's more than one kind of cruelty." That line landed like a weapon. Nate looked down at his plate. Lydia, who had joined last minute, shifted uncomfortably. I felt the heat of their stares, but I smiled through it. I wanted them to see me as strong, misunderstood, not guilty. Evan pushed back his chair. "I think we're done here." "Running away again?" I asked, louder than I meant to. "That's what you do best, isn't it?" He didn't answer. He stood up, smoothed his shirt, and said, "You'll understand soon." Then he turned to Marjorie. "Thanks for dinner, Mom." When the door closed behind him, the silence felt unbearable. I forced a shaky laugh. "He's been acting strange lately. I think he's just stressed." Marjorie didn't smile. "No, dear, he's done." Her words hit me like a slap. "What's that supposed to mean?" She stood, gathering plates. "It means he's moving on, and you should start preparing yourself." I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them see how unfair it all was. Instead, I just sat there, feeling the eyes around the table, pitying, judging. Even Nate wouldn't look at me. After dinner, Lydia drove me home. She didn't say much until we reached my street. Then she sighed. "You keep telling everyone you're the victim, but the only person you're fooling is yourself." I glared out the window. "You sound just like him." "Maybe because he's not wrong," she said softly. When I walked into the house, the lights were off. Evan's shoes were gone from the hallway. His mug, his keys, the jacket on the hook, all gone. Panic rose in my throat. I ran upstairs, opened the closet, half empty, the drawers too. He'd taken what he needed and left quietly, just like that. No note, no explanation, just absence. Clara was asleep in her room, clutching her stuffed bear. I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the empty side where Evan used to sleep. I thought about calling him, begging him to come back, promising to change. But pride held me still. Instead, I grabbed my phone and texted Nate. "You knew he was planning this?" No reply. "You could have warned me." Still nothing. It wasn't until the next morning that I saw his response. "He's done protecting you, Ilyra. You should get a lawyer." For the first time, I realized what that meant. This wasn't just a fight. This was strategy. Evan wasn't trying to hurt me out of spite. He was building something, step by step, while I was too busy spinning my stories to notice. And now, everyone had chosen their side. By the end of that week, the whispers started. People at the clinic looked at me differently. Marjorie stopped answering my calls. Even Lydia went quiet. The only person who still spoke to me was the lawyer. Evan's name appeared on the papers. The house felt heavier every day, the silence deeper. I kept replaying his words from that dinner. "You'll understand soon." And I did. Because understanding doesn't come all at once. It creeps in, piece by piece, every time you realize you're talking to empty air. Every time you open a closet and half the clothes are gone. Every time the phone rings and it's not who you want it to be. By the time I finally sat down with my own lawyer, I already knew what Evan was doing. He was turning my own words, my own lies, into evidence. Every story I'd told to make him look cruel. Every exaggeration, every rumor. It was all coming back to me like an echo. He'd warned me once that silence was a kind of power. I never believed him. Now I understood what real quiet could do. And the worst part, he didn't even have to raise his voice to win. The day I saw Evan again, everything felt too bright. The light from the office windows hit my eyes like punishment. I sat in that cold leather chair, across from his lawyer, my hands twisting in my lap, trying to look composed. Evan sat on the other side of the room next to his attorney, calm, unreadable, dressed neatly in a blue shirt I didn't recognize. It wasn't the one I bought him years ago. That one had faded. This one was new. He looked like someone who had moved on. The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Marsh, before we begin, I'd like to review the documentation provided by Mr. Marsh." His tone was polite, professional, like he wasn't about to dismantle my life piece by piece. I didn't look at Evan. I couldn't. I just said, "Fine," even though my voice came out thinner than I wanted. He opened a folder and started listing things. Financial records, message screenshots, affidavits. Each word hit harder than the one before. When he said messages exchanged between Mrs. Marsh and Mr. Nathaniel Marsh, I felt my stomach turn. He laid out printed copies across the table like cards in a game I'd already lost. Texts, times, photos, timestamps. None of it explicit, but enough to tell a story. Enough to make me look like exactly what everyone was whispering I was. I finally forced myself to look at Evan. His eyes met mine. Not angry, not gloating, just done. "You went through my phone," I said, my voice breaking before I could stop it. He didn't answer. His lawyer did. All evidence was obtained legally and with authorization from a shared account. Mr. Marsh has been advised on the process. Legally. That word echoed like a drumbeat. I'd spent weeks expecting a fight, shouting, chaos, tears. I never imagined he'd be this quiet, this organized, this deliberate. The lawyer continued, describing financial accounts, savings, the house. Evan had separated everything, split his pay, rerouted direct deposits, secured Clara's school fund under his name. Every move precise, calculated, impossible to undo. "You can't take everything," I said. "You can't take my daughter." He didn't look at me when he spoke. "I'm not taking her, I'm protecting her." The lawyer slid a document across the table. "Mr. Marsh is seeking primary custody, citing instability, emotional distress, and potential exposure to inappropriate influence through family relations." It took me a second to realize what that last part meant. He was saying my affair, my mistake, made me unfit. My throat tightened. That's ridiculous, I said. Clara is my world. Evan finally turned toward me then. Then you should have thought about her when you brought my brother into our house. His words weren't loud, but they felt sharp enough to cut. I wanted to fight back, to remind him that he hadn't been perfect either, but every excuse sounded small in my head before I even spoke it. The lawyer cleared his throat again. We're open to mediation, Mrs. Marsh. If you cooperate, visitation can be discussed, but the custody petition is proceeding regardless. I sat there numb, staring at the papers. My name in bold letters, beside words like unfit and unstable. It didn't feel real. It felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. After the meeting, I followed Evan into the hallway. You're really doing this? I said, my voice echoing off the tile. He paused but didn't turn around. You did this. I made a mistake, Evan. One mistake. You're acting like I ruined everything. He faced me then, eyes cold. You didn't ruin everything. You ruined trust. And that's not something I can rebuild. He walked away before I could reply. I stood there trying to breathe, but my chest felt hollow. When I got home, the house was too quiet. The walls seemed to echo his silence. I sat at the table, the same one where that first envelope had arrived, and stared at the empty seat across from me. I remembered every time I'd complained that he didn't talk enough, didn't notice enough. Now I would have given anything to hear his voice, even if it was just to say my name. Marjorie came by later that evening. She didn't knock, just let herself in, like she used to when she came to help with Clara. She stood in the doorway for a moment before saying, "He told me you met with the lawyers." I nodded, unable to speak. "I didn't come here to fight," she said softly. "I came to pick up some of Clara's things." The words hit harder than any argument. "You're taking her." "Just for a few days," she said, "until things settle." I wanted to scream that nothing would settle if everyone kept taking sides, but the truth was, there were no sides anymore. Just consequences. When she left, the house felt colder. I wandered into Clara's room. Her drawings still lined the wall. Stick figures of our family holding hands, smiling. I sat on her bed and stared at them until my eyes blurred. Later that night, Lydia called. Her voice was careful. "I heard about the hearing." "From who?" I asked. "Does it matter?" she said gently. "Ilyra, maybe it's time to stop fighting and just accept it." I laughed bitterly. "You think this is justice? He gets to walk away spotless, and I'm the villain?" "I think," she said after a pause, "that he's just finally protecting himself. And Clara." I hung up before she could say more. I didn't want to hear logic. I wanted someone to say I was right, even if I wasn't. The next week blurred into court dates and signatures. Every time I walked into that courtroom, Evan was there. Calm, professional, surrounded by people who believed him. I hated how dignified he looked, how reasonable. No one saw the version of me that used to exist before the loneliness, before Nate, before all the lies. They only saw the woman who destroyed her own home. The day the ruling came, it was raining. I sat in the courtroom, my palms sweating, my throat dry. The judge's words were steady, almost kind. Based on the evidence presented and the stability of each home, primary custody will be granted to Mr. Marsh. Mrs. Marsh will have supervised visitation until further review. Supervised. The word echoed in my skull. Like I was a danger. Like I couldn't be trusted alone with my own child. I don't remember standing up or leaving the courtroom. I just remember Evan's voice, quiet behind me, saying, "I'll make sure she knows you love her." I turned then, desperate. "You think that makes this okay?" He looked at me, calm as ever. "No, but it makes it bearable." He left before I could reply. I sat on the courthouse steps for a long time, watching the rain hit the concrete. People passed by, talking, laughing, living. I wondered how long it would take before my name stopped being whispered in town, before people stopped saying, "That's her, the one who slept with her husband's brother. When I finally drove home, the house looked smaller somehow. The lights dimmer, the air still. I went to the kitchen, sat at the table again, and stared at the stack of papers the lawyer had given me. Custody forms, financial settlements, legal language I barely understood, all neat, all final. My phone buzzed once, a message from an unknown number. "He's doing okay. Don't make things harder for him." I didn't need to ask who it was from. Nate. I deleted it without replying. For the first time, I didn't feel anger or guilt, just emptiness. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, steady and cruel. I thought about the woman I'd been when this all started. The one who thought she could play with fire and not get burned. The one who believed being misunderstood was the same as being innocent. Now, there was nothing left to justify. No one left to convince. Just silence. I looked at the empty chair across from me and whispered. He didn't even look back when he left. And then it hit me. This was the quiet I'd once begged for. The peace I thought I wanted. Now it was all I had.